MACOG meeting for 4/10/23, starting with roll call.
All right, good morning. I'll read the roll. Please let us know if you were present so we can record your attendance. Councilperson Jesse Bohannon.
Present.
Commissioner Mike Burrows.
Here.
District Deputy Commissioner Matt Dykesley. Councilperson Dwight Fish. Councilman Doug Graham. Commissioner Carrie Groninger.
Here.
Councilwoman Kathy Groninger. Councilwoman Lori Hammond. Councilman Greg Hicksonball. Mayor Phil Jenkins.
Here.
District Deputy Commissioner Todd Johnson.
Here.
Mayor James Mueller. Mayor Rod Robertson. Councilman Mark Root. Mayor Mark Center.
Here.
Mayor Jeremy Stutzman. Mayor Joseph Talmer. Commissioner Susie Wyrick is attending online. You got the audio working. Great.
Yeah.
And then Mayor Dave Wood.
Here.
We have a quorum of members present. We have 7 members present, so that is a quorum, but we won't be doing electronic voting. So we'll just be doing motions from inside the room.
Thank you, James. And minutes for March 8th.
Motion to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries. Debbie Gardner, financial report. Morning, Debbie.
Good morning. For our fiscal year through the end of February, our year-to-date expenses were $4,853,008.35, which is about 56% of our annual budget. Our cash balance at the end of February was $2,765,144.38. And our cash disbursements for the month of February was $602,520.24. Are there any questions over the financial report?
Just to point out on the financials, you'll see that our audit, as will be the next agenda item, our audit was complete for fiscal 22. I don't remember if the invoice was just larger or if that was because we had 2 audits in 1 year.
No, so this is not including our current audit.
Yeah.
This was the last audit that was paid during
Okay, so just to walk through
this
this,
fiscal year.
just walk through this in case anybody's new or doesn't remember. We are supposed to have our audit done shortly after we close out our fiscal year. Our fiscal year runs from July to June. So that means timing wise, we should start an audit around October. Many years ago, because of a change in how we needed to report something from PERF, we had to wait for that information to come out on a calendar year, which means we couldn't even be ready for an audit until January. So this started to pose a problem as State Board of Accounts got more and more of a workload where our audit kept getting later and later, and we were almost a year removed from our fiscal year by the time State Board of Accounts was able to complete an audit. This was starting to become problematic, so we mentioned this to our auditor during the last, well, we mentioned it a lot of times, but during our last audit, we said, what do we need to do? And that was for the fiscal 2021. So that got done right around the beginning of this fiscal year.
Right.
So
I
the
think in
invoice,
July last year, we
yeah,
finished
so
that one.
the invoice came in kind of in the wrong fiscal year. So it hit in this fiscal year for 22,000. So it's slightly over, but this budget line item is going to go even more over because we were able to work with State Board of Accounts to get our audit back into a more appropriate cycle so that we can start our audit better in time with our fiscal year. So you'll see probably March or April's financial report where we'll receive a second invoice for a second audit because we basically did back-to-back audits to make up this gap.
Yeah, we
So
had 6
that,
months in between
yeah.
audits this time.
So we'll carry a negative line item on that specific line item until we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, and then we'll balance those line items out. So just FYI, we've probably mentioned this before that we're doing 2 audits this year to get caught back up. But I just wanted to point that out since this report finally starts to reflect that negative balance. So long explanation for a simple issue.
I had one question on your disbursement list, that Metric Environmental LLC, and a pretty big chunk. What was that?
Yeah, so Metric is our consultant for our environmental for the brownfields program. So we did a competitive RFP. We hired them. They are the prime contractor for our brownfields grants. And so they are the ones that are then coordinating the phase 1, phase 2s, as well as then their subs are the ones doing those drillings or those samplings. Right. And so all of that money is basically from the brownfields program, and that's covered at 100% expense from EPA. So,
okay.
Yep.
Thanks. I make a motion to approve financial report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think the audit is also on the agenda.
Yeah. So the the FY 2022 State Board of Accounts audit report is in your packet. That it was started, it took a little bit longer than what we wanted. But it was started and now completed around, I don't know, we completed around March, middle of March.
I think we had the exit conference in March.
Yep. The overall audit presented no findings. It was clean and what would be the word there?
Is it an unmodified?
Unmodified opinion. That's the word I was looking for. Yep. So there were no findings or any deficiencies noted from this report. And we are currently, well, that report is presented to you. We had asked for the adoption or the acceptance of that audit report. And then we have an engagement letter to work with Crow through State Board of Accounts again for this fall, and slowly getting back into what I would call a more comfortable timing for our audits, because I would like to see them started, 90 to 120 days after the end of the fiscal year rather than 6+ months later, which has been the case with State Board. So if there are any questions, we can answer that about the audit, but I'm extremely happy with those findings and extremely appreciative of our accounting team led by Debbie and on those overall results for fiscal 22. Fiscal 22 also saw some additional expenses because we started to see some of those COVID-19 fundings from CRISA and those CARES and those kind of programs, as well as this audit included the transit program, as well as then the transit program is usually our lead funder that gets audited the most. But then because it had been a few years, the transportation program was also audited. And again, no findings within either. So extremely appreciative of our team.
Make a motion to accept the audit report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Mayor Phil, anything for secretary?
You have in your packet the March modifications, administrative modifications. Again, this is all done administratively. If there are any questions on any of those from month to month, feel free to reach out to the staff before the meeting. These are your administrative modifications for March 2023.
I see no old business. James, new business?
Yeah, for new business, we have a few transportation resolutions that Allison is going to present.
Morning, Allison.
Good morning, everyone. Well, that's the clicker is working.
Really fun. Okay. Yeah, let's see about it. Okay, sorry about that. You're good. Okay. So our first amendment to our transportation improvement program this month falls under Transportation Resolution 11-23. So just one item under this resolution is an NDOT initiated project at State Road 15 and County Road 146 in Elkhart County, or 3.06 miles north of US 6, so the southern part of New Paris. The project is an intersection improvement with added turn lanes, and we are adding in right-of-way in fiscal year 23. We currently have preliminary engineering in our TIP currently, and the estimated cost to complete for this project is about 1.8 million. So happy to take any questions on this. Otherwise, I would ask for your approval of Transportation Resolution 11-23.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second with no further discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Alrighty, and then moving on to Transit Resolution 12-23. So for our transit projects in our TIP, we will program placeholders, and then once numbers are finalized, we'll go back in and make adjustments to those final numbers. So this resolution is focused on adjusting 5307 allocations after Transpo just recently completed their splits. So item A is for acquiring ADP software, and we're increasing federal funding by 150,000. Item B is for operating assistance for fixed route. We're increasing federal funding by 325,000. Item C is for acquiring shop equipment, and we're increasing federal funding by 50,000. Item D is for acquiring support vehicles, and we're increasing federal funding by 60,802. And then item E, we did not have a placeholder for, so we're adding into our TIP, and it is related to acquiring miscellaneous support equipment. Total cost is 62,500 for that. So happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I would ask for your approval of Transit Resolution 12-23.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, our next resolution is Resolution 1323. 1323 is related to transit. You'll recall that every year FTA gives the urbanized area an apportionment for the Section 5307 funds. These are what are called the urban transit funds, more or less. It comes to the urbanized area, which then it is the urbanized area's responsibility to split that out amongst the transit providers. So it's our job as the MPO to get the transit providers together and to work with them to create the actual split of those funds. So we're kind of the arbitrator of that. So we work with Transpo, Niles Dial-A-Ride, and NICTD on those fundings. Because the urban area sneaks up into Michigan and covers Niles, we also work with our partner organization, SWMPIC, which is the Southwestern Michigan Plan Commission. So they're kind of like us up in Michigan. Every year we get together, we talk through what the apportionment is, and then how that could be split up amongst the transit providers. The transit providers have unanimously agreed to the split that is being presented. You can see that on the screen and on the agenda. It's a total apportionment of $5,662,517. You can then see how that is split up between NICTD or South Shore, Transpo, and Niles Dial-A-Ride. This, again, has been unanimously agreed to by the transit providers. We are recommending the approval of this apportionment. I'm happy to answer any questions about this split. If not, I'd be seeking your approval of this split of Section 5307 funds.
James, as they're working through that split, is it based on population or rides, or how do they?
Yeah, it's a good question. So essentially what we start with is We get various performance metrics from each of the entities, each of the transit providers. It's based on ridership and mileage and a number of different factors. As well as then there are factors that MTA uses, I think in their table 4, which are various demographic things. And we put that all in, and that creates a recommendation or a scenario of a split between rail funding and bus funding. That is, however, just a recommendation. We usually then create 5 or 6 different scenarios for them to generate conversation around, where we talk about this is what folks received in previous years versus this is what folks are asking for, or those kind of things. What would it look like if one entity went up 5%? What would that do to the other entities? And then we sit around the table, have a conversation, but it's largely starting point is based on various data metrics. Then there's a little bit of a conversation of, hey, who's got a big capital project that's coming up where they might need a little bit more? Because not only is this funding able to be used for operations, but it can also then be used for capital. And many of those providers use it both ways. So there's a little bit of a conversation that happens. Ultimately, though, there is a hammering out of an agreement that isn't always perfectly aligned based on data metrics. But yep.
Make a motion to approve the allocation of apportionments.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
All right, next resolution 1423, very similar conversation. Not only is there 5307 funds, but there's 5337 funds. 5337 funds are what are called state of good repair funds, but those funds are only eligible for either rail providers, as in transit rail providers, the intercity rail kind of thing, or bus rapid transit. We do not have any bus rapid transit at this time in our region. So the only eligible applicant is NICTID. So of the $4 million, $4 million and change, NICTID would receive all $4 million. That's a fairly simple agreement to be able to negotiate that. So we would then ask, and we can probably present 1523 as well, which is a similar set of funding, which is the 5339 funds, which is for bus and bus facilities. This is capital funding that can be used for buses and bus facilities. It's a much smaller pool of funds than the state of good repair, but this is kind of how things shake out based on how Congress allocated fundings originally in this bill. And so the urbanized area gets $317,154. This is a conversation that happens between Transpo and then Niles Dial-A-Ride around what types of capital projects are going to be needed in the next year or so. A lot of times it's around buying of vehicles. A transit bus that Transpo uses is over $500,000 in cost, so it's not exactly like these funds buy a whole bus. They buy about a half of a bus at this point, but they work together on what that split is. And so this isn't necessarily data-driven in performance metrics, but much more needs-driven based on the age of fleet, based on what kind of capital projects they have going on. They have unanimously agreed to the split of Transpo receiving $232,154 and Niles receiving $85,000. We could probably accept, if you all would prefer, accept a motion to approve resolution 14 and resolution 15 at the same time.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
All right. Next, we have a few administrative items that I want to handle. So first, in your packet, you have some changes that I am proposing to the personnel policies, and I will work through describing each one of these right now. First, you have the cover. This is not the entire personnel policy. I'm just giving you the relevant portions of what's changing. You'll see in the table of contents that we are adding a new section called remote work. I'll describe that here in a minute. On the next pages, there are a few areas of time and attendance under office hours that we are proposing to change here. Since 2020, we administratively agreed to change what we called our core office hours. For those not familiar, we offer our employees two types of schedules. One is a compressed schedule where they work Monday through Thursday, and they basically log for 9.5-hour days. Okay. And then they always have Fridays off. The other schedule is what we call our flexible schedule, where the person works 5 days a week, but they work 7.5 hours a day. We had always allowed, under our previous personnel policy, for them to start their day anytime between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. You come in, you don't need permission as long as you're there between 7 and 9. You start your day and you work your 7.5 appropriately. This allows our employees to have flexibilities where, hey, you have a morning dentist appointment, or hey, you got an afternoon thing for yourself or your kids. This allows them to flexibly change their schedule on a daily basis, but still we know that they're going to be there during our core office hours. In 2020, we temporarily changed that to be between 6 and 10, 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. This allowed for us to stagger our employees entering and leaving so that we didn't have everybody there all at the same time. So this allowed us to somewhat distance. Employees really appreciated that flexibility, and we've piloted it now for 2.5 years, and it has not caused any issues within our functions, our abilities to operate. And so instead of working on a temporary ad hoc plan that was created in 2020, we want to memorialize that in our official personnel policy. So you'll see in red, there's a few times where the times have changed to allow for folks to work in reflecting that during that flexible that flexible schedule, they can come in anytime between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. So that's the first item. Are there any questions on that? It's a pretty benign thing that we've been doing informally for the last 2 years. The next item within this is then the remote work policy. Again, in 2020, as many of us tried to figure out, how to operate, we worked on creating some remote work options. All of our employees have laptops, we have a VPN, a number of different things. And the rule kind of has been right now that folks can, within reason, do some remote work. Well, within reason to one individual versus another individual is different. And so what we want to do is we want to continue to offer to our employees flexibility in offering them remote work. But we also recognize that we need to have some appropriate guardrails and definitions around some of those, around what it means to remote work and what does the approval processes look like. So you'll see in the remote work policy, essentially this remote work is never guaranteed. It's not a right. It is something that we offer and it can always be taken away, is essentially the high level summary. But that there are two types of remote work that we're defining here. There's situational remote work, which just means that this occurs kind of, it is what I would call episodic, intermittent, unscheduled, or ad hoc. You are getting new, a plumber is coming to your house and they've given you a time between 6 a.m. and 12 p.m. And instead of taking vacation time, you're going to work from home because you have various products or various meetings that you can attend. But, instead of taking 6 hours of vacation, you're going to just work from home. It's those kind of things. And so the situational remote work would be for an employee cannot exceed 15 hours in a pay period. So across 2 weeks, because that's our pay period, it's 15 hours. That's a cumulative of 15 hours. This type of remote work can be approved by the direct supervisor and is approved via email. Then there is what we would call routine remote work, where this is something that is scheduled, it is ongoing, it is regular, it's identifiable. For example, one of our employees works out of state. We determined many years ago at this point that her work was largely internal, we did a whole assessment of her functions and did not have items that were really different based on her being in person versus her being remote. That would be routine remote work. Or, for example, a person always needs a Wednesday for the next 6 weeks because of etc. That is so therefore that's anything that exceeds 15 hours per pay period. It's ongoing, it's regular. That requires my approval. Okay. That is a formal approval. There will be some forms that have to be filled out. And we talk about who's eligible for remote work. We talk about what are those considerations that we'll be making related to remote work, that the performance standards still need to be the same as someone in person, that communication needs to be prompt, especially during those core office hours. And it just describes MACOG is not going to pay your internet bill if you're working from home or any other costs related to you working from home. We are not going to do any changes in salary based on you working, somewhere else. And it just walks through all of those guardrails around what it means to remote work so that we have a standard definition of what remote work may look like. Now, to the board, what does this mean? Largely, you won't see a change. Many of our positions, if not all of them, require an in-person element. And so this is much more around an employee who needs a little bit of flexibility on a random Monday than it is about our workforce going completely remote. Our workforce is never going completely remote. That doesn't work for our general business function. But we want to make sure that we have a standard definition and that, folks are treated the same and that we know what the rules are around remote work, just so that we can monitor and use that better in our overall kind of setting. Happy to answer any questions related to these policy changes.
Appreciate you spending all the time and going through this, James. I know it's important. And that's something I think that everybody likes, that flexibility, but I do think that having good guardrails there, they know where the boundaries are and they know who they need to ask permission from, because sometimes they can be abused. So appreciate you trying to find this out.
One thing I failed to mention is that our legal, Mike Triple with Thornton Grodnick, did review the policy, provided some comments, and we made those corrections. So it has been reviewed by legal in case anybody was curious.
I move that we endorse the revised remote work policy.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Probably need to include the hours of operation too. Or
Oh yeah, that would be the case.
So the whole policy
policy,
itself?
yeah.
Okay.
I presume.
Yeah.
But just for notes, it's a good clarification.
We still have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, James.
All right, these next two items we can probably do together. Essentially, the next item is the endorsement of the state fiscal year 23-24 self-certification statement. The self-certification statement is something that we provide to INDOT and USDOT on an annual or biannual basis. And essentially, the high-level summary is it says that we are going to follow all of the federal rules that we already signed up to follow based on spending the federal funds that we spend. So it lists the various federal rules that we are going to follow, and this is just an annual statement that is self-certifying that we follow those items. Next item, because I think we can do these together because they're actually related, is the MPO certification review. This is just an annual statement that we provide to INDOT Federal Highway that says that we do a certification review with Federal Highway every 4 years. We recognize the date of our last review, which was June of 2020, and then that there were no corrections or no corrective actions, and that our next review should be in 2024. This is just an annual statement that we've had a certification review, and if there were corrective actions, it would show how we're fixing those. But since there were no corrective actions, we're really not to report on. And so this is just an annual certification review statement, if you will. So I think it's obviously up to you all, but I think that those could be endorsed or approved jointly.
I make a motion, we approve the 23-24 self-certification statement along with the MPO certification review.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries.
All right. That is the main kind of pro forma items of business. Next, we have two presentations. We are joined today by Graham Fishel from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, who's known as the NTIA. Graham is going to walk us through kind of a number of things related to broadband and broadband funding opportunities that will be occurring in the state of Indiana as well as across the country over the next few years. And just wanted to make us aware of a number of opportunities that are forthcoming. So Graham, if you want to come on up, and I'll pass you the clicker, and your presentation should then be there if you go to the next one. There we go.
Thanks, James. Yeah, like James said, my name is Graham Fishel. I am the Federal Program Officer for the BEAD program. Like everything in federal government's got a fancy acronym. It's the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. And it's funded by the bipartisan infrastructure bill law that passed in November of 2021. I'm based here in Indiana. I just work with the Indiana, and part of what I do is travel the state and bring awareness to the opportunities that are going to be forthcoming as a result of the BEAD program, and to help the state broadband office with all the joyous requirements that come with federal grants, which I'm sure this group is well aware of. So at its heart, the BEAD program is designed to connect, in this case, every Hoosier with affordable, high-speed, high-quality internet. There are 4 high-speed internet programs that NTIA administers. I've talked mostly about BEAD today. That's by far the biggest program that we have, IP internet program we administer. It's nearly $50 billion nationwide. You're probably asking how much Indiana will receive. Source on the next slide. Each state is going to receive an allocation based on a funding formula. Will at the very minimum get $100 million, but that's the minimum allocation. The rest of it is based off of the number of underserved locations in each state. And so I've seen a lot of estimates. Some third-party groups have done estimates for how much, based off their calculations, how much each state would receive. I've seen estimates ranging from about $800 million on the low end till about $1.2 billion on the high end, just for Indiana. NTIA is going to make those announcements. June 30th will be the date that each state finds out how much they're going to receive from the BEAD program. So we'll have a little bit more clarity at that time. wanted to kind of give you an idea of where we are in the timeline. Like I said, $50 billion nationally. Right now, we are in the pre-planning stage right now. I'll talk about this a little bit more on my next slide, but NTIA awarded the state of Indiana $5 million for their 5-year plan program and preparation. One thing I wanted to highlight, BEAD is more than just deployment. I said it's a huge big part of what the program is designed to do to bring high-speed internet, but it's also about eligible uses of those dollars, which include adoption and equity programming as well. If we're building out, billions of dollars worth of broadband networks, we want to make sure that there's a subscriber base there just to maintain it over time so that it's not in vain. So you can see here, we're right here in 2023. The state's going to start working on their 5-year plan, and you can see kind of the timeline, start seeing the final proposals due at the end of next year, at the end of 2024. And by the way, if you have some questions, feel free to jump in at any time. Like I said, NTIA awarded $5 million to the state of Indiana last November. They now have 270 days to work on their 5-year plan. Some of the eligible uses of the $5 million to establish capacity in the state broadband office. All of the dollars for the BEAD program are going to go through the state broadband office. And this group would be happy to know that there's a native son of Mishawaka that's transitioned into the state broadband director role, Steve Cox. You guys might know him. So you guys will have no problem getting in touch with them, making sure that this area receives due attention. So you can kind of see there some of the things that the state's going to be working on with the $5 million that we awarded them at the end of November. What the BEAD program is going to focus on is making sure that they connect every unserved and unserved and underserved location. You can see that there's some definitions of those terms. Unserved being anything less than 25/3, underserved being anything less than 100/20. Tertiary goal of the program is to community anchor institutions, so your hospitals, libraries, schools, things like that. Make sure that they have access community or community places to make sure that they have affordable high-speed internet. One thing that's also really key to this is the fact that any participant in the BEAD program must offer a low-cost internet program. For most folks, it's going to mean making sure that their eligible subscribers are enrolled in ACP. That's a program administered by the FCC that offers eligible subscribers high-speed internet at a max amount of $30 a month, all the way down to $0. So any company that wants to participate and build out and receive BEAD dollars will have to offer ACP program to their subscribers. Additionally, I thought I mentioned the city of South Bend has received an ACP outreach grant from the FCC directly to make sure people are aware of this program. It's the new program designed to combat the high costs of high-speed internet. And one thing I wanted to mention finally here is that the state is going to be required as part of the NTIA's rules to conduct thorough local coordination engagement process. So we'll be doing listening sessions across the state, gathering input from local communities, things like that, to make sure that the plan that they're putting together is representative of the needs of each individual community. I think the state's going to start announcing some of their local coordination activities here within the next week or so. We'll make sure we communicate that. The state communicates that to you folks, so you can all of your existing plans can be incorporated into what the state is doing, and also allow your constituents to participate in the BEAD program and planning process as it unfolds over the course of the next year, year and a half. And really, that's basics of the program. Just want to kind of make sure that you guys are aware there's a large amount of broadband deployment and adoption dollars coming to the state of Indiana. And we're just kind of give you the basics of the program, and I'm happy to answer any questions, my contact information is here. If you guys have follow-up questions or questions you're receiving from your constituencies, happy to try to answer those as best as I can. So with that, I'll take any questions that this group might have.
So who applies for this money, the provider or the community or municipality?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So all the dollars are going to go through the state, create the broadband plan. The sub-grantees are going to be internet service providers. There's some, not just anybody can apply for it. They have to be a provider in good standing. But it should be incorporating all of each individual locality's specific, needs and goals into their program. Some grantees are going to be, internet service providers for the most part. Should add that technologies for deployment, satellite and unlicensed wireless are ineligible for B dollars. It has a preference for fiber. That's what has been kind of widely acknowledged. It's kind of the most future-proof technology. Will have the longest lasting impact. So should have mentioned that. Thank you for reminding me.
This is a curious question related to providers. Will providers that provide dark fiber, what is the viewpoint of the funding program for a provider that provides dark fiber versus immediate lit ISP provider?
Yeah, I would say that maybe I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but essentially if there's a area that has lots of unserved locations, that there's dark fiber already there, I think it would make sense for that provider to apply for B dollars. Obviously, it's a lot cheaper to light fiber that already exists than to build out a brand new fiber network. Also, I find a lot of this dark fiber is on the backbone. They might be a provider that has a lot of unlit fiber, might be a good applicant for the middle mile or the internet kind of backbone. That might be a good applicant for that program as well in that scenario.
And then related to the ACP, the affordability, if communities have to be kind of participating in that, is there any funding within the BEAD program that would help support communities? And could that be hypothetically regionalized?
Yeah, and I might not have been clear on that, Ken. So when I say participate in the BEAD program, I'm talking about providers that want to be sub-grantees have to offer that. So it's the impetus is not on the community to make sure that ACP is available. It's on the providers. They want to be sub-grantees. They want to get public dollars. Want to make sure that they're advertising to their subscribers that a low-cost option is available. So thanks for allowing me to clarify that.
It just ought to be great to have Graham here today, as this is going to be a major funding opportunity over the next 5-ish years. I know many of your communities, your counties, your cities, your towns are trying to think through how do we improve our broadband, our high-speed internet opportunities and options. And so wanting to make you aware that this program is very much in its creation phase, that the state of Indiana is still working through that this is different than Okra's program that Okra has had over the last 3 years on the next level connections.
Yeah.
And that this is another avenue. It does mean working with the service providers. And there is some challenges there with that, but that there is opportunities here for those service providers to pursue these fundings.
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point, James. As the state's doing these local coordination events, a lot of times I'm hearing if they have some communities are having difficulties with a certain provider or other, I would just make sure that you communicate that either through the local coordination events or also just directly to the state broadband office, so they're aware of these things as they're putting together their plan. Obviously, they're really great providers. They're providers that a little bit, less robust of a track record, and I think it's just important to communicate those things. Like you said, they're doing these local coordination events to take your feedback seriously and incorporate those things into their plan. So appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys. And again, if you have any questions, concerns, things that come up, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll try to get questions answered. So
Thanks, Graham. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
James, would you know when those public meetings or whatever?
Yeah, we'll make sure to put that on as they come up. Our next item is a brief presentation related to the Connect Transit Plan. So we have our consultant with Jarrett Walker and Associates, Scudder Wegg, our project manager, who's online. You'll recall that over the last 18 months, we have been working on the Connect Transit Plan, and we are now at the final set of recommendations. And without stealing Scudder's presentation, we are at that adoption phase. And so Scudder is going to walk you through the final recommendations, what the Transpo Board has already considered and approved. And then today we will be asking for your approval of the Connect Transit Plan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scudder.
Thanks so much, James. Can you all hear me fine?
We can hear you great.
All right, excellent. It's a pleasure to be with you again today. As James said, we're here to present a quick overview of the final plan. You all have seen this before, and get your approval of the final plan. We've been through 3 phases of engagement with the public. At the choices phase, asking about high-level priorities. At the concepts phase, showing people what different networks could achieve. And at the draft plan phase, getting input on an actual recommended network. We had more than 55 events throughout the 3 phases, more than 2,300 individuals participated in person, and more than 1,500 responses to the 3 surveys we did throughout the process. In Elkhart and Goshen, I'll just give you a quick reminder of what is included in the recommendations. You all have seen this in our prior presentations because there have not been major changes since the draft plan phase. So in the short term, we have number 1, a numbering of all the routes. So that's just a kind of bit of a change to people's expectations about the interurban trolley services and their naming. Mm-hmm. And then the addition of 2 new routes in Goshen based on Goshen's investment in new service, and a few tweaks, very small tweaks to service in Elkhart, particularly to what is today the orange route, which is the number 35 on this map. The additional funding network, which is intended to be the guide for what you do over the next 10 years, has significant increases in frequency on those 2 new routes in Goshen, as well as an extension of service to north and to East Goshen, I should say. And then in Elkhart, a significant increase in frequency of service up Cassopolis and also to the south, an extension of service out to Amazon and industrial areas on County Road 6. In South Bend and Mishawaka, we have a number of more significant changes in the short term, including adjustments of frequency of service and changes to how service goes to the Excel Center, and the improvement to 30-minute service on Main in Mishawaka, for example. Overall, trying to simplify route patterns across the day and in the evening. And then long-term, similar to what we have shown in Elkhart and Goshen, about an 80% increase in service over 10 years with 15-minute service, which is at the frequency that people really can just walk out and catch a bus whenever they want on 5 major corridors in the South Bend, Mishawaka area, as well as some new service to the Pokagon community and Four Winds. There's a number of other, what I would call lower altitude specific recommendations in the plan that address some other issues, in particular recommendations for a regional van pool program. There are, in your region, there are a number of industrial employers that are costly to serve with fixed route transit, but van pools can be a very useful tool to try to provide a service to those employers to help workers reach those employers. We also have a number of recommendations regarding improvements to sidewalks and stops. 2 examples, I'll just highlight. One is improved access to the Excel Center from Bendix in South Bend, and with the new service recommendations in Goshen, a walk access to get to Oakland Hospital from Johnson Street, and how to make that connection possible. Also included in the plan is a detailed list of individual improvements. Those 80% additional funding networks, obviously, those are not things you would overnight make those kinds of improvements. They will take time to implement. You have to buy new vehicles. They take significant local funding. So we have tables of what it would take to make certain individual improvements to get from your current network to those additional funding networks over a multi-year period. So South Bend and Mishawaka, for example, the transpo service, we have how many revenue hours and how many annual operating costs and the additional number of buses you would need to do that 15-minute service from downtown to Notre Dame, for example. And similarly, in the interurban trolley service area, those line-by-line improvements to service, how many additional operating dollars would you need every year, and how many additional buses would you need for each of those individual improvements? So that's a quick summary. Our next step at this point is we hope you will adopt the plan here momentarily, and then MACOG and Transpo staff will move into the process of implementing the short-term network changes over the next 6 months to a year, roughly, and then work with you all over time to hopefully implement the additional funding network recommendations. Thank you.
And just to give you an update, Transpo approved the plan
March 20th, yes.
So their board is in agreement with the plan. So just in case there are questions about how does Transpo feel about the plan, they've already looked at it, they've already approved it. So happy to answer any questions about the Connection Transit Plan. Otherwise, we would be seeking your adoption of that plan today. It has been a plan that we've worked on very hard over the last 18 months. I appreciate all of our staff's involvement. I appreciate working diligently and jointly with Transpo and everything that Jarrett Walker has been able to provide. While it maybe isn't the most transformative plan, I do think there are a lot of great recommendations that could be very transformative to our region based on the current level of transit service that we provide. I just think about in South Bend, if we were able through various funding sources to come up with about $2.8 million is the price tag, we could have 5 routes that would be serving the major key corridors every 15 minutes. That would be very rapid and regular service that would take our transit service in our region leaps and bounds above where we are at a price, but not necessarily an unrealistic price. So I know that some of those scenarios for the future where we look at 80% more service are a doubling of Transpo's budget or the trolley budget. But I think that there are some great scenarios there that are very affordable that could mean some massive changes if we're able to line up the right resources to implement those. I do think that there are some great opportunities that we have outlined within this plan. Happy to answer any questions.
So you mentioned, James, 2.whatever million.
2.8.
Not accounted for in any budget.
Not accounted for anywhere right now.
So where does that come from?
Sure. So I think that there are a number of options that can be pursued. First, there are a number of competitive programs that we could look at. Second, we could decide at some point that some of the funds that are used, that are allocated by MACOG could be assigned to that. Many of those federal programs that we could look at for additional funds might provide 50% to 80% of that need. From there would be a conversation either with employers if they saw a benefit or with local governments. I don't think that there would necessarily be any immediate ask, and that would be up to every local government if they wanted to do that. So if South Bend wanted to take some general funds and fund that, we're not going to say no.
Is that a sustainable 2 point whatever?
I think
million a year?
that's ultimately the question. But now we have a goal. Now it's how can we fund it? How do we break that down? You know, this is going to be something that if we get there, it's going to be phased over time to be able to get to that. And I don't know if long term that means that the best approach is looking at, you know, something like a property tax increase, since Transpo is a PTC, but that's ultimately a direction that Transpo will need to decide. We're going to work with them on what would be some possible ways that we could explore that option. And I use that just as an example of 5 routes being 15 minutes, I think would be extremely transformative to our transit service. There are other ways that we can fund some of the other recommendations. For example, the regional rideshare or the regional van pool. This board has already agreed that that's something we're going to pursue. That's something that we're already going to fund with some CMAQ funds. We're going to pilot that, see how that goes. We're going to issue an RFP, see what firms might be able to provide that service, track that performance metric and see how it does over time. But I think there are a lot of ways that don't necessarily come on the backs of all the other taxing entities, but probably long-term for some of those things, if we want to pursue them, there will have to be a look at sustainable funding sources. So we're aware of that.
So is there a referendum option for Transpo? Should they want to pursue that?
I think that's one of the things that we have to explore because state law around that is I'm a little unclear on. I know that they allowed that authority for Indianapolis for the red line and all of those kind of things, but I'm still personally a little unclear if that then is applicable. Amy, you might have better experience on that than I.
We would have to seek approval on the state level first. As James mentioned, Marion County and just a few other counties are able to do local referendums to support transit. So we would have to address it on the state level first.
My own personal opinion is that Transpo is a taxing unit. They have options available for funding, much like other taxing units. I've got several taxing units looking at other taxing units, us specifically. Hey, can you help us with this? Can you help us with that? And they have the ability to raise their own revenue should they choose.
And we're fully aware of that. We're not asking in this plan that anyone commit anything at this point, right? This is going to be conversations with various employers that may want to try and fund a route. This may be a number of different things where local revenue is derived various different ways. So this does not come with and Mishawaka should contribute X. We're not doing that in any way, but we are trying to make people aware of if we wanted to invest more in public transit, rather than just saying public transit needs more money, but flipping it around saying, if we want to invest more in public transit, this is what we could get. And that investment might mean a number of different things. It could be from employers, from local governments, or just from looking at Transpo's own taxing entity responsibilities.
We're spending in budget. We're in a deficit a little bit spending wise. We have prepared for it. We are getting the impacts of the property tax caps and all that. Public safety needs more spending in it and more resources available. So I'd love to ask other, taxing units if they would be willing to kick in for some public safety, which is priority number one around here. But those are just some of the conversations we're going to have.
Yep, absolutely.
What's the next step?
The next step for this is that there are short-term recommendations that are in this plan that are basically budget neutral, that we've found efficiencies within our budgets or within our timings of routes, or small changes where a route moves in a different direction, or things like changing the interurban trolleys routes from colors to numbers. Because eventually, if you add more routes, you run out of colors or you start getting fun things like magenta and teal, right? Like, so at a certain point in time, so those kind of short-term recommendations that are budget neutral would be things that are worked on in the next 6 months to a year, depending on the various projects. There are some small things like, hey, if we could move a fence over at this parking lot, it would mean that we don't have to route through that parking lot, those kind of things that we'll work on in those site-specific areas. So that short-term kind of recommendations are things that are largely budget neutral that could be implemented in the next 6 months to a year. The longer-term recommendations are, if you think of it like a community's comp plan, they are things that we would look at over the next 10 years. I don't want to put a complete window on it, but so those longer term recommendations are things that we'll be looking at and looking for those opportunities over the next 10 years is essentially what that set of recommendations looks at. If that makes sense.
Thank you, James. And Mayor, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd make a motion to endorse the Connect Transit Plan Final Recommendation Report.
Second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries. Thanks, Scudder.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Scudder. All right, next we have I know we're a little over on time here, so we'll try to be somewhat quick with our staff updates, but we have a number of updates that we want to make you aware of related to grants and fundings, as well as plans and programs. So I'll turn it over to Leah.
Yeah, so the first one that we have here is a funding opportunity that's federal for charging and fueling infrastructure. It can be for CNG, propane, or electric vehicles, and MACOG is exploring an application specifically for electric vehicles on a regional basis because the minimum grant is $500,000, and we're focusing initially on rural areas, small towns, not being left out of that, and then within our urban areas, we're targeting in on people who cannot charge at home, so multifamily housing. So if you have any particular ideas of anywhere in the region, be happy to talk about that. It can be located on private property, which is unique from other opportunities we were looking at, as long as it's publicly accessible to anyone. So it's not restricted to the tenants or the employees or customers of a particular facility. We're also open, we're mostly talking about slower destination charging, getting people to come downtown or wherever to stay for several hours. We're also open to looking at major gaps in our level 3 or fast charging infrastructure in our region. So right now we're looking at a gap that just opened up in Plymouth and South Bend Airport. So if you have ideas related to faster charging, absolutely happy to entertain both and we can talk. So it's due end of May. So we have a little bit of time, but this is a pretty major application for us. You want to get started if you want any ideas that you have.
Yeah, and we are looking to submit that as, preferably we're looking to submit that as a region, so as MACOG. So we'd really like, if you have potential site locations, that we fold that in, because a singular level 2 charging station in a national competitive program is not going to be that competitive based on our understanding. Whereas it being part of a larger portfolio, if you think about the way that we kind of grouped all of those level 2 charging stations together under the Volkswagen Fund, where we were able to do 10. Okay, I wanted to
We
say
were
10.
looking to double that.
Yeah, so really trying to fill out that map and get more locations. So, a few of you had experience with that program from the Volkswagen program, had a few stations that were installed that are now operational. So just think about those, but where else might we be able to fill in on the overall network?
It is 80-20 money, but we really want to emphasize working with private partners to try to fill that 20%, whether that's a utility or community foundation or local car dealership or something. So don't let the 20% scare you there. Come find me after if you have ideas. Next.
Yep, sorry.
All right. Next Wednesday, Partners for Clean Air Luncheon. Today is the last day to sign up so we can feed you. So let me know after if you'd like to attend. I'll just get you on the list. We're really excited to have South Bend Community Schools bring our first electric bus in the region to that. So that's an opportunity to step on that bus, talk to the driver, the superintendent, the director of transportation will be there as well. So that's all I'll say about that, but we hope to see many of your faces there.
Great, and when Allison comes up, a great update that we have
Thank
is,
you, Lisa.
during this meeting, NDOT announced the community crossings, award applications. The region received, by my quick calculation, so I may have missed some people, because it literally was happening while we were in this meeting, is about $9 million in funds for the region. You'll remember that there are 2 calls, so this isn't like we missed out. There is still a call later this year, but that is Bristol receiving $1 million, Elkhart County receiving $1 million, Etna Green receiving 81,000, Mentone receiving 352, Milford receiving 205,000, Middlebury receiving 300,000, Napanee receiving about 857,000, Pearson receiving 99,000, Sydney receiving 12,000, Warsaw receiving 408,000, Marshall County receiving $1 million, New Carlisle 720, Osceola 200, Plymouth 632,000, South Bend $1 million, St. Joe County $1 million. Those are the ones that I saw. If I missed anyone, I apologize, but wanted to give you that breaking news update. I'll turn it over to Alice.
Very exciting.
Full story at 6.
Yeah. Stay for the rest of the story.
Just quickly wanted to make everyone aware that we have 2 documents out for public comment right now. So our new draft fiscal year 24 to 28 TIP. And then we also have an amendment to our current long-range transportation plan to add in an added travel lanes project on US 33. This is a project that adds capacity to our roadway network, so it needs to be in our long-range plan. So both of these are open for public comment until April 28th. They've been available at area libraries, on our website, at our office, and then we'll be having a public open house this afternoon from 3 to 5 p.m. at MACOG's office. If anyone is dying to review the TIP or this long-range plan amendment and wants to come provide your feedback. So just wanted to make you aware, and I'm happy to chat after if anyone has any questions.
And while we are amending our current long-range plan, we're also working to update the long-range plan to 2050. So we're still going through that process. This week we do have 2 stakeholder meetings that we will be holding. One will be at the Napanee Public Library in the morning tomorrow, and then another that will happen at that Elkhart Chamber of Commerce on Friday morning. And so the intent of this meeting is to kind of, with all of the local planning processes that we've gathered data, and as well as public engagement and feedback, we're planning to take that and then look to our communities to kind of initially establish a preliminary list of projects that would like to be considered for inclusion in our long-range plan. So this is kind of the first step of that specific project identification. If you have questions about the meetings that are happening this week or are unable to make it and would like to talk further, feel free to meet me after meeting.
Thanks, Caitlin.
All right, and one last step update real quick. Last month we talked a little bit about some new dashboards we had on our website for crash data and bridge data. Added another new dashboard we call the regional profile, which includes census data for our region. You can find that on our website, maps.macog.com. But there you can check out population data, housing, economic data, and transportation data for our whole region. And then we also have a section on there that lists out all of our communities, each of the 4 counties, 7 cities, all our towns, and have their own individual dashboard, so you can look at their data as well. So particularly if you want to go check that out, I'm sure that might interest many of you. You can see that also on that same page under our regional profile. And again, that shows all that same data, but for that town, city, or county. So just again, another part of our developing some more tools, more data for you to look at, see on our website there. And again, we welcome any feedback, any other ideas you might have. I'd love to hear that. So check our website out, maps.macog.com.
And like Zach mentioned, we're trying to provide more ways to interact with all of the data that we have that are hopefully useful to you as well as the public. So when we thought about this tool, we thought about the number of times either grant applications or comprehensive plans or various studies need to compile data on a community. And instead of just doing that every single time, we wanted to be able to have a resource that you could just go to and it's there. So if you wanted, you could go and look at the town of Sydney and see that it has, according to the census, 61 people who live there with a median age of 37 years old. You could see all the information about age or disability, education, total housing units. There are 46 of them. You can see all of that for our smallest community all the way up to our biggest county. Okay, so all of that information is there for you to be able to look at and interact with. With that, that would conclude all our staff updates for today.
Thank you, James. Privilege of the floor. And public comment.
I believe we have at least one public comment today.
Good, ma'am.
It's okay. I have some
Come on up,
handouts to pass around. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Willow Weatherall, Executive Director for Downtown South Bend, and I'm here on behalf of the Downtown Train Coalition to talk a little bit about the renewed momentum and interest in restoring train service to Downtown South Bend. Downtown South Bend's mission or vision really for our downtown is that our downtown is a vital, vibrant, and irreplaceable Midwest city center that is both a beacon and a boon to the city of South Bend and the region. And we've identified restoring train service as a key strategic priority to achieve that vision and really unlock some incredible opportunities for economic development. What I have just handed out, this is a print off of a slide deck that includes bullet points and visuals that went along with a much more in-depth presentation. So I hope it'll be treated as such. This is high-level visuals and bullet points, and during privilege of the floor, I don't have time to go in-depth to all of this. I wanted to just give a very high level of the kind of support that is lining up behind the downtown option, and some of the opportunities and the context that's changed, which we believe make the downtown option much more viable than the last time it was studied. So just to provide just a very high level, I want to say the Downtown Train Coalition takes a position of collaboration. We know that there is interest and support for restoring train service, not restoring, but realignment to the west side of the airport. And we support the goal of South Bend to Chicago 90 minutes or less. But we believe that 90 minutes should be downtown to downtown. And we think that our proposal can accommodate useful connection to the airport, but that we'd be missing a huge opportunity not to seriously revisit the downtown option right now. So some of the things that have changed in terms of context that folks may not be aware of. I was just at the ballpark last night for the Cubs home opener. Fortunately, we didn't take home a win, but we gave the Sky Carps a good run. But just talking about what's happening around in the southern edge of downtown South Bend, around where train service would be restored. Number one major development, new development, is stadium expansion for Four Winds Fields and South Bend Cubs. That's a $50 million investment that is moving forward. And in addition, the Cubs are they're shooting to become a AAA affiliate for the Chicago Cubs in 2030 when the contract with Iowa. That alone is a game changer for our community. But when you start to pair that with the development of the Studebaker campus, the historic manufacturing facilities just on the south side of the tracks, what we're seeing in terms of investment there, new startups moving into that ecosystem, then you pair that with what's happening with the housing authority to the immediate west of where the train station would be. This is 19 acres of public housing that is all coming down and being re-envisioned as mixed income housing. Another massive, massive opportunity that would dramatically reshape this entire area. Then there are some other very significant projects, a little bit smaller in terms of dollar amounts, but still, you know, on the order of $20 million projects. There's 2 brand new housing developments that are going to go in just east of where the train station would be, and in addition to 5 other buildings that were vacant that are now under local ownership and are being actively redeveloped as either entrepreneurship hubs, residential, or other mixed use properties. So we talk a lot about seizing this, you know, once in a generation opportunity in terms of the infrastructure bill, and we do believe that that is, you know, that is the case. And there's we need to make sure that have sort of the eye on the prize in terms of access to that funding. But we also think there's actually like 3 or 4 once in a generation opportunities, all catalyzing around the downtown station, that are that really we need to make sure we're not shooting for an expedient option at the airport and missing out on what we see as the true potential of the downtown station. The studies have shown over a $400 million economic impact over a 10-year period. But what I think is really important to consider with the downtown option, especially when it comes to passenger rail service, is the permanence of that infrastructure. So that's $430 million over 10 years. When we start to look out 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, this is a 5-year project with a 100-year impact. We have over 25 major business and civic leaders lined up as part of the Downtown Train Coalition. And we would love MACOG's support for this initiative. Again, we're taking a posture of collaboration with the county, with, you know, NICD, the airport, and the chamber. And we think there's a win-win to be had here that prioritizes the downtown option and still maintains useful connection of train service, or connection between the train and the airport. So we'd love the opportunity to come back to do a proper in-depth presentation on all of this, but definitely wanted to get it on your radar. There's certainly some urgency around the conversations right now. And I realize a lot of people aren't fully aware of the major investment that's happening in that area and how transformative taking a step back for some master planning and making sure all these puzzle pieces are put together in the right way would be both for the city of South Bend and our region. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? My next step before I head south is I get to judge a chili contest at Lockmuller Group, so looking forward to that.
It's a warm day for chili.
That's right. How about an adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. No further discussion. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. All right.